Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Oasis Focus on Finance show. This is your special Ramadan edition. I'm your host, Shafiq Morton. As always, it's great to be with you. If you're watching us, from us to you, a great, special and blessed Ramadan, inshallah. During this month, we're going to be having a look at sustainable and responsible investing. This is seen through a United Nations, something called ESG, environment, social, and governance, those three pillars. And during this month, we will take you through ESG from the beginning right through to its conclusion. Joining us today are our special guests. We have Yusuf, Ebrahim, and Shehzaad, Harrif. Gentlemen, welcome to the show, and of course, Ramadan Kareem.
Thank you, Shafiq.
Thank you, Shafiq. Ramadan Kareem to you also.
Reading through the United Nations, a special article on their website, it pointed out that ESG was introduced 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago, 2006, and that when it first came out, less than 200 people, companies abiding by it. We fast forward to this year, we see 50 countries and over 1,000 companies around the world listening and abiding by the principles of ESG. Now at Oasis, for the past 20 years, the company has been also following these principles. So tell us something about ESG and how exactly does it fit in?
Let me start by saying you often hear these terms ESG and socially responsible investing used interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
And when people do that, they very often intend for it to mean the same thing. And they are not wrong because these terms are so closely linked. But strictly speaking, there is a difference between these terms. The difference is centered on the concept of sustainability, which I will come back to in a minute. Now, socially responsible investing, often also referred to as ethical investing, is a concept that explains how through the process of investing, you take societal values into consideration. Under this definition, when investing, you look at the impact to society or to the investors on whose behalf you are making this investment. As an example, the consideration needed to adhere to the Islamic requirements of a Muslim investor would mean that the religious and ethical requirements would form the basis for which investment decisions are made. In this light, you would automatically only invest into permissible companies and exclude any stock that would expose a Muslim investor to industries involved in adult entertainment, gambling, alcohol, and pork. So in a nutshell, it is investing that excludes certain industries. ESG, on the other hand, refers to investments that are made taking into consideration key factors that ensure long-term sustainability is achieved. Shafiq, ESG evolved out of socially responsible investing, and that is why people often use the terms to mean the same thing. However, ESG has progressed from only being principle-based to now ensuring that it is more integrated with the environment, societal needs and values, and that it adheres to the governance controls that are in place. Going through each of these factors forms part of the decision-making process when we analyze the stocks selected for our investment portfolio. Shafiq, I work very closely with this component because I am directly involved on the trade side of the investment business. I can confidently say our process follows strict parameters when it comes to stock selection. We are asking the questions and we assess if companies are meeting our principles of responsible and ethical investing. So on the environmental side, if we are analyzing the energy sector, we are asking, are these companies providing renewable and sustainable energy? And is it clean for the environment and society? Another example is the manufacturing sector. In this instance, we look at companies that access their raw materials via eco-friendly methods, that the process of production is not harmful and not using chemicals that may be harmful to the environment. Within both these types of industries, we are also assessing if there is long-term wealth created for society, that there are good labor practices, that there is equality in the firm, and that these firms are also doing their bit by giving back to their communities. And then we assess the management teams of these companies. It's very important how fit and proper they are, how strong their accounting and audit processes are, which essentially speaks to the area of governance for a company. Shafiq, the process of stock selection is not isolated to the value that the stock holds at any given time. There is a fair amount of due diligence employed into the process of selecting a stock, but more so if you want to ensure that you are selecting an ethical and sustainable stock for your investment portfolio.
Shehzaad, picking up where Yusuf has left off, why is ESG or ethical investing so prevalent today, given the background that we see more than 1,500 major companies buying into this whole thing?
So Shafiq, thank you. So sustainable investing and ESG have been around for at least 20 years, but it simply has been termed differently. And really what is really driving ESG is, on one side, regulation, but on the other side, you have companies that at their own willingness. The rise of ESG investing is driven by various factors, ranging from regulation to a company's own willingness to prioritize sustainable investing. But of course, there must be a reason to that. Research showed that ESG investing is not just about doing good. It is actually linked to the performance of a company or an asset. Actually, companies that manage sustainability risk and opportunities tend to have stronger cash flows, lower borrowing costs, and higher valuations. The tide has really shifted when evidence showed that ESG issues have financial implications. In fact, a lot of companies focuses on short-term gain and performance rather than looking in the long term. So this is because typically a CEO or a CFO of a company would have a tenure that ranges from 15 to 20 years, and their strategy is basically for that horizon. So they don't really look beyond or what is going to happen. But when in doing so, it's at the expense of a long-term sustainable gain. But returning to the main question, Shafiq, ESG investing experienced exponential growth as a result of investor demand also. So the investors are actually driving ESG. More and more people are concerned about their impact on the impact of their investment and where are their money going and what is happening to their capital growth. Like, I'm sure no one would like to invest in a company that has a going concern issue or some governance issues. We've seen so many times companies failing or having to close their door due to poor risk management and poor corporate governance. And through ESG investing, those aspects are actually incorporated in the investment process and eliminated through the screening. So what happened is now we're having an investor who is more and more conscious and really want to know where his or her money is going. And as a result, it's driving the demand for ESG investing. Another aspect that is also important is regulation. Regulation is also a key driver of ESG. For example, in South Africa, in 2011, the Pension Act was amended, requiring pension funds to incorporate ESG factors that could materially affect long-term performance. And more recently, the FSCA proposed to make it compulsory now for pension funds to report on how they're actually implementing ESG. So on one side, it was that you need to factor it, and now it's show us how you're actually doing it. So it's actually a global drive, and it is even more pronounced in Europe and in the US. In US, it is actually a fiduciary duty. You need to respond to it. And what we are seeing now, it has actually transcended to financial markets. We heard about green bonds, green financing. So it's actually companies raising debt to actually finance sustainable projects. And they most likely in the water sector, climate change, renewables, energy, and green funding is becoming more and more prevalent. And in 2017 alone, 137 billion USD of green bonds were issued. And currently, if I'm not mistaken, the market size should be around 300 to 350 billion. And these funding, what are they actually targeted to is towards renewable projects such as water, climate change, environmental issues. Lastly, I believe that technology and the rise of transparency is actually a key driver of ESG. What is really happening is people are using technology and they are empowered by technology. And through ESG, it's actually allowing them to express their own views, like their own values, whatever they respect, and ensure that their savings and investment actually reflects their preferences without compromising on returns. Also, we need to be cognizant that the profile of the investor is actually changing. The millennial investor is actually on the rise. They are becoming economically independent and they are making their voice heard through technology and social media. They are hyper aware of what is happening around the world and they are spurring change along the way, and one of which is sustainable investing. And that is why we have seen ESG becoming a central part of many businesses these days.
But now, Yusuf, Oasis, for many years before ESG was actually formalized via the United Nations, E being environment, S being social, G being governance, just to remind ourselves that this in principle was in practice long before it became embedded in the UN. So when it became formalized, were there any difficulties, any bumps in the road in terms of applying it to yourself as Oasis?
Shafiq, Islamic investing by its virtue alone is ethical, and it takes a prudent approach. As Muslims, we don't look at ourselves and our practices in isolation. We share our practices with our fellow brothers and sisters, and together we are called upon to be considerate of one another and to take care of those around us and our communities. So the idea of responsible investing, as it is touted around now, is an age-old concept in Islam. The purpose of Islamic finance is to improve living conditions and well-being, establish social equality, and prevent injustice in trade relations. The environment is also considered under the tenet of Islam that says man has to play the role of steward over divine creation. In its application, waste and useless or superfluous consumption are deemed unacceptable. These elements closely resemble those of ESG as it is known today. Look, traditional investment has always been driven by an effort to maximize risk-adjusted returns, whereas our goal has been to ensure financial market activity is compatible with investors' ethics. From the onset, Oasis investments were designed to be sustainable, create wealth for society, and improvement of overall quality of life for our investors, and that goal has never changed. Our business has continued to grow over time as a result of the firm principles that this firm and its investments are based on. Certainly, the UNPRI put forward guidelines that have improved efficiencies in our investment practices, but these were not new to us, and if anything, these guidelines serve to refine our offering to our investors, and we continue to lead within the Sharia-compliant investment space and also within the mainstream investment space as well.
Indeed, now, Shehzaad, some discussion groups will tell us, the cynics will tell us, that ESG can actually affect investment performance. Is that true? Is this a gross generalization?
Shafiq, as mentioned previously, it actually has the opposite effect on performance. ESG investing is associated with good corporate governance, and good performance leads to sustainable long-term gain. So, however, to answer your question properly, one needs to understand the concept of ESG investing. So, basically, as Yusuf mentioned, it has some shared characteristic with Sharia investing. So, during the screening process that we do as investment professional, we identify investment restrictions with regards to what industry you can invest in. For instance, ESG investment strategies avoid certain activities and products so that the portfolio is aligned to the value of the investor, aligned to the goal of developing a sustainable and fair society, and do not harm the people and the environment in doing so. So in applying that screening criteria, you have a universe of really good stock that expand across the various industries, sectors, and even geographies. And you can actually expand it to different asset classes, not only equity, but you can expand it to property also. So this approach not only does offer extensive diversification, but it actually gives you capital protection. It has a low-risk approach to investment, and it creates long-term value, as I mentioned previously. You only need to look at some of our Islamic funds from our investment product range to know that our investors who have invested for a long term have benefited from the growth seen in this range over the years. If I can take the Oasis Crescent Equity Fund, this fund has delivered over 2,700% cumulatively to its investors over the period since inception. That works out to an annualized return of around 17.6%. And that's for the period since 1998 to date. That means that if an investor had invested 100,000 Rand on 1st August 1998 and did not take that money out, that would have been actually worth 2.8 million Rand today. And that's enough money to actually buy a decent house in today's term or do something really substantial for yourself. So Oasis has proven time and again that responsible and sustainable investing are able to actually deliver real value to investors over time.
Shehzaad, you were mentioning that ethical investments are not only sustainable, but there's, in addition to this, it can also benefit the community. Tell us more about that aspect.
Thank you, Shafiq. An ethical, socially responsible investment would usually provide a relatively lower level of risk, and they would typically preclude an investment manager from engaging in activities that involve significant speculation. In addition, the inclusion of a socially responsible element would also facilitate greater social cohesion to create additional stability in the investment universe. This may ultimately improve the long-term returns that are derived by investors, as the factors that give rise to large adverse shocks are actually eliminated. In addition, what we have seen recently is that the government and really global regulatory institutions are trying to crack down unethical businesses. Those businesses are usually come to the forefront and offers investors a large premium, and you actually fall in the trap and you actually get into a Ponzi scheme. So what ethical investment means that if you decide to go that way, the ESG way, the ethical way, what you avoid is basically those kind of traps. So you're actually investing in a sustainable fund that will deliver long-term performance for you. And also, we can grow our wealth in a number of ways, but not all of these ways are actually aligned to what is correct and what is appropriate for us. As Muslims, we need to be mindful about what we invest and where do we invest and where is the money going. The money we invest to grow is not only our money, but it needs to be shared also. We are taught from an early age that we form part of an ummah, of a community, and where there are members of that community that are less fortunate than we are. So we must be able to actually give back to society and contribute to their well-being if we are able to do so. So choosing an investment that is halal also ensures that we remain contributors to our zakat pool, allowing us to fulfill our obligation to our fellow brothers and sisters. We are also required to keep our money clean and save it in specific instruments and ensure that at the end of the day, we fulfill our mandate of ensuring that we spend, save, and actually allocate our money responsibly. In a sense, ethical investment fulfills this requirement and is both socially and commercially desirable, as it actually maximizes our long-term gain and it actually gives you real return. And in doing so, it actually improves the community and the state of the affairs in which we live in.
And carrying on with that community theme, in South Africa we have significant socio-economic challenges. So how can ethical and sustainable investment perhaps change or benefit that landscape?
So when we actually look at most countries, the gap between the rich and the poor continues to increase. That's what has been happening. This is particularly evident in South Africa, where the Gini coefficient, which measures the degree of inequality between the rich and the poor, stands at 0.63, and this is actually the highest in the world. This is more than twice than those developed countries. They're actually at around 0.3 on average, and we are at 0.6, so it's more than double. Furthermore, if South African social grants had not increased at a relatively high rate, the level of inequality in our domestic economy would have been much worse. Hence, such increase in the gap between the haves and the have-not would have promoted social tension. Therefore, ethical and social responsible investment have the ability to make a positive contribution, both directly and indirectly, as they are able to fund a number of social upliftment projects directly through new industry developments or job creation opportunities in sustainable industries.
Yusuf, it's the month of Ramadan, it's the month of giving, and of course wise and ethical investment creates money, disposable income that gets spent on things like zakah, on sadaqah, and zakat al-fitr. So how can that play a positive role socially and communally?
Thank you, Shafiq. As you have just noted, there are many different forms of charity in Islam. These include zakah, lila, sadaqah, and fitra, all of which contribute towards the improvement of our society. For example, zakah, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, encourages compassion and social justice for fellow humans who may find themselves in an unfortunate state. This form of charity is payable at the rate of 2.5% of the value of one's personal wealth, and distribution of this form of charity leads to the purification of one's wealth. As stated in the Holy Quran by the Almighty, take alms from their wealth in order to purify them and sanctify them with it and pray for them. In addition, the act of giving combined with God-mindedness in your spiritual and moral intentions will lead to a fair and sustainable society. With the Oasis Crescent range of products, we inform you of the amount of non-permissible income that is donated to charity on your behalf. This donation could form part of your zakah, which constitutes more than just a mere handout to the poor. In addition, as this donation from the Oasis Crescent range of products is made on an annual basis, it could form a sustainable part of your regular zakah, and the pooling of these contributions across various investors allows for the funding of long-term projects, which has a positive and substantive impact on society.
Yusuf, in addition to the benefits of zakah, which is part of our worship, how can instruments such as lillah and sadaqah, which are essentially voluntary charities, flow into, for example, like development projects?
Shafiq, most definitely. Lillah comprises of any form of charity that is given solely for the pleasure of Allah. Unlike zakah, which is an obligation, lillah is purely given on a voluntary basis. Sadaqah is also a form of worship to the Almighty, and it involves giving to charity. Like lillah, it is not only obligatory, and there are no conditions relating to calculations and to whom it can be given. Across the various forms of charity that you have highlighted, it is always important to look at the sustainability of these initiatives, particularly in areas such as education, skills development, and self-improvement, as these are generally long-term initiatives. There's a famous saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, giving him a fishing rod and you feed him for a lifetime. Such forms of education and skills development lead to the empowerment of individuals, where you may see an improved self-worth in an individual as he is able to make a meaningful contribution to the economy and society in general.
Shehzaad, now our final question. Let's have a look. How can we as Muslims benefit from investing in an ethical way in terms of personal growth and in terms of benefiting society at large?
So let me start by, most people actually, they underestimate the impact of inflation on their investment, but what it does, it eats away one wealth. So investing in a product such as the Oasis Crescent Equity Fund provides an investor with adequate protection against inflation, but it actually would result in an increase in their real wealth also by a significant amount. Let's look at this through an illustration. Let's assume that Mrs. Ismail invested 100,000 Rand in the Oasis Crescent Equity Fund back in 1998. She could have left this money in a bank or kept it at home. Let's look at how her zakat contribution would have been when invested in the Oasis Crescent Equity Fund versus if it was left to sit around. So in 1998, her zakat contribution from the Oasis Crescent Fund would be 2,500 Rand, and that's based on 2.5% contribution to zakat. Assuming that she didn't touch her 100,000 Rand except to pay zakat over the years, her money, if left in a bank or even in her cupboard, would have gone down considerably. However, so too would be the amount of zakat that she would have been able to contribute over the years. So by contrast, her investment in the Oasis Crescent Equity Fund, which by the way strips out the non-permissible income on a daily basis, would be worth around 2.8 million Rand as mentioned earlier. Her zakat contribution over the years she was invested would be approximately 450,000, and that compared to 2,500 Rand back when she came in to invest. In today's environment, you do need to ask yourself if your contribution to society can go further. We are all capable of doing better, investing wisely, and being able to give more. Oasis offers you the perfect saving vehicles that allows you to give back meaningfully, so why not do it?
And this concludes today's edition of the Oasis Focus on Finance show. A special thank you to our guests, Yusuf Ebrahim and Shehzaad Harrif. Should you wish to watch this or any of our other shows, you can log into the Oasis Crescent YouTube channel, where you can catch us on LinkedIn. Should you wish to call us, you can dial 0860 100 786 or email info@oasiscrescent.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Shafiq Morton. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.